Hey, welcome back to Mountain Murders Offbeat.
I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
How's it going? Midweek.
I'm doing good.
We're going to kick off our Offbeat series on asylums.
Oh, they're so creepy.
You think so?
Yeah, don't you?
Well, yeah. Back in the fall, I went on a little road trip with my best friend to the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, which is in Weston, West Virginia. Super creepy.
Yeah, y'all had a pretty good time there, right?
We had some paranormal experiences while we were there.
Really?
Yeah, I've got videos, audio, some strange stuff happened.
Oh, well, you take these, they're foreboding structures, they were built a certain way, and a lot of them built before the year 1900. So, I don't know, it's like they thought that the architecture and the layout of the building could help a mental patient, but then they go on to develop these really scary looking buildings, so I'm not sure how that works out.
Right. When we get to our episode on Trans-Allegheny, we'll talk a lot about the architecture. But today, we're going to focus on a hospital that is in our backyard, Dylan.
I bet I know what it's called.
We are going to talk about Broughton Hospital.
Broughton has a really long history.
It does. And we're going to get into some of that, talk about some of the ghost stories associated with the buildings, and just some of the eerie incidences that have taken place there over the years.
Yeah, well, I think no matter what someone might believe about paranormal things, if energy can be absorbed into land or a structure, I think an asylum definitely would be a place that has a very strong energy.
For real? Are you ready?
Yeah, let's get right into it.
Broughton Hospital was established March 29th, 1883 in Morganton, North Carolina. Psychiatry was a relatively unknown field for centuries, and throughout history, various cultures had different ways of treating those with mental illness. One of the earliest insane asylums was founded during the 13th century in England.
Oh, wow. I bet that was a hell of a place.
The modern era of treating mental illness came during the early parts of the 19th century with large state-led efforts. New York created the first asylum in 1842, largely with the help of a woman named Dorothea Dix. She's very known.
I was going to say, I've heard her name before.
Well, there's the Dorothea Dix State Hospital in Raleigh, North Carolina. So you probably have heard her name quite a few times. The 1800s were a terrible time for the mentally ill. Families, often embarrassed, would chain their loved ones up in sheds and barns to keep them out of public view.
Yeah, it's like mental illness was not something that was discussed or talked about openly.
The mentally ill were kept out of the public eye, as I mentioned. They were often living in extremely poor conditions. People without families ended up in jail or in derelict houses where they were forced to labor away, often without pay, and they were given very little food.
Yeah, it's, I think we take for granted how open people are about mental health issues and things nowadays. And long ago, or not even that long ago, it was embarrassing to the family to have someone with mental issues.
Well, I think there's still stigmas associated with mental illness, and I'm glad that people are more vocal and willing to discuss mental illness now. But there's still a little bit of that.
Well, I say that.
Stigma attached, but it was so much worse back then.
Yeah, it was
most definitely
a lot more brutal, but of course we dismantled our own mental health system in the 80s.
Thanks, Reagan. Dix had traveled to Europe as a young woman and learned about caring for the insane. European doctors believed in providing compassionate care, and it became a cornerstone of Dorothea Dix's work. She returned to the United States and started a movement to bring public attention to the poor living conditions and the treatment of the mentally ill. By 1849, North Carolina and Delaware were the only states without a state-run institution for the mentally ill.
Wow.
So we were late in the game. In North Carolina, by 1875, there were 700 people considered insane but not hospitalized. The Raleigh Hospital was the first state-run hospital, but it soon was not sufficient. It became insufficient to meet the needs of the population. On March 20th of 1875, the North Carolina General Assembly granted $75,000 in the budget to create a second mental hospital.
Well, it's amazing how far money went back then.
Yeah. 262 acres were purchased in Morganton, North Carolina, which, what would you consider that, Dylan? Like the foothills?
Yeah, I would say that's the foothills area, or down around Morganton.
You can still see some mountains, but it's a bit more, like, it's a bit flatter than where we are.
Yeah, it's definitely in the transitional spot right there between the mountains and the, I guess,
The Piedmont?
the Piedmont area.
50 convicts were forced to make bricks for the new hospital building. The cost was $5.98 per 1,000 bricks.
Wow.
Well, yeah, you had free labor with these convicts.
Well, and, if someone deserves to be in jail, is it such a bad thing to make them work?
I don't know, but this seems like really hard work.
Oh, I'm sure it was brutal, and I'm sure I probably couldn't do the work these guys were, and I'm sure see, that's what happens. It needs to be done in a fair and a safe, humane way.
I'm sure this chain gang operation was like not concerned with safety.
No.
Or, breaks and things like that.
Or water,
Yeah.
even.
Throughout the hospital's history, prisoners would be utilized in operations, including the laundry program, which I believe is still a thing.
Yeah, I believe so.
In 1877, 60,000 more dollars were given to complete another wing at the hospital. So around 250 patients could be housed at this facility. Dr. Patrick Livingston Murphy was the first superintendent of the hospital, and he stayed there for 25 years. He brought new programs and ideas, improving the lives of the patients and conditions. Like Dix, he believed in compassionate care. He created a colony program, which was like a halfway house where people could live more independently. He started a nursing school at the hospital. Murphy lived with his wife and children on the 3rd floor of the center building. He died there in 1907.
So it sounds like those are some rather progressive ideas and programs he was bringing to the hospital.
Definitely. Now, during his time, Dr. Murphy pushed for a name change as he thought insane asylum was derogatory. Because I believe at that time it was called like the Western North Carolina Insane Asylum. And he thought that was derogatory and degrading to patients. He pushed for the state hospital at Morganton to be the new name. In 1959, the hospital would go under another name change. This time it would be renamed for Governor Melvin Broughton.
Oh, and that name stuck. So let me, to clarify for myself, before Miss Dix came back with this idea of passionate care from a compassionate care from Europe, was it more like you just lock them away, lock them up, control them, and just feed them?
Well, there weren't a lot of state-ran hospitals. Most of them were privately ran hospitals.
Okay.
Or maybe they were church types of, maybe had some sort of religious organization involved. But a lot of it was just poor conditions. It was a lot of people just locking away their family members. They were beaten, abused. If there were treatments, they were pretty horrific.
Yeah. You had people experimenting, doing anything they wanted to do. In medicine, period, let alone mental health, was very, very primitive still.
I mean, it was not uncommon for people to send their relative, their child, whatever, to one of these asylums, and then you just never saw that child again. They didn't go visit. It was out of sight, out of mind. You just locked these people away and forgot them.
Wow, that's
just terrible.
It's very sad.
Can you imagine?
No, I can't.
Don't get it. Well, during the 1920s, the conditions were not that great at the hospital. There was one physician to 355 patients.
Well, at that ratio, there's no way they're able to do even hardly basic needs for all those patients.
Nurses worked 15-hour shifts, and attendants lived on wards with patients, and they were only given one Sunday off per month.
Damn, sign me up.
24/7 job.
That sounds really awesome.
These people didn't have families. You couldn't get married, have children.
Yeah, it's crazy how these types of hospitals sometimes tend to draw sadistic, mean, cruel people, or the people who keep working there are sometimes a very bad person.
Well, I think it's really hard, even people who have a good heart and want to make a difference, when you get there and it's overcrowded and there are budget constraints. I mean, it's got to wear on you after a while, and people burn out. And it seems like the ones who stick around typically in these terrible conditions are just terrible people.
They stick around for the wrong reasons.
And they're looking to do terrible things.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, the Great Depression made life at Broughton even more difficult, as there was one physician per 500 patients.
Wow.
Because once they opened the hospital, in the beginning, they had all these, it was like well-intended, and Dr. Murphy wanted to do these wonderful programs, but then it just started being flooded with patients.
Yeah.
At first you've got like 250, then you've got, thousands of patients, people just coming in all the time.
Yeah, and there's even if you had the best intentions, there'd be no way to do these new programs or get everyone involved in some of the things you think would benefit them.
There was one nurse watching over 21 patients at a time when this was happening in the 30s. At this point, the basements were fitted for beds, and they added a room for 500 more patients at the hospital.
Oh, my God.
So by the 1940s, Broughton housed more than 3,500 patients.
That's a lot of people in one area.
The hospital had a philosophy about fresh air being helpful, so they had large fans on the wards, often, wanting to have the windows open, a lot of fresh air pumped in and out. The grounds were beautifully landscaped, so much that Morganton residents enjoyed taking drives around the property.
That's kind of funny. I mean, I guess they thought that helped the patients as well, but I mean, if you have all these issues with money and overcrowding and stuff, it seems like the flower beds would be the last thing that were, taken care of.
There were vegetable gardens, which helped feed patients and staff members, as well as livestock. Patients were allowed to work with the animals, and they were able to work in the gardens. This was considered like therapy for the patients. And often the doctors thought if the patients were able to go out and work like in the garden, or they were able to work with the livestock, that it gave them like this sense of purpose and pride.
Well, and that sounds like a good thing.
There was entertainment, live music, dances, picnics, and holiday parties during the 40s. People in town, like area residents, talked about how Broughton was like the place to go on the weekends for like social activity.
Really?
Like the dances that were held at the hospital were like the go-to.
Well, I mean, it is the 40s, and I don't guess there's a whole lot of opportunity for entertainment.
So they're just like jitterbugging to Glenn Miller at the hospital.
Well, I mean, you have this large, it's campus style, this large hospital, and it's beautiful, and it sounds like the flowers and things that were pretty in the spring. And there's, what else are you going to do? Go to the barn stall?
You're just going to lay down the boogie and play that funky music till you die. Let's talk about some early psychiatric treatments. We're going to take a little departure from our Broughton story, but these are crazy and just horrific, and I had to talk about them because some of these treatments were actually used at Broughton.
Yeah, some of these just, it makes the hair on the back of your neck tingle. It's torture.
At times, a person could be committed to Broughton for the following reasons. These were actual, documented reasons, conditions on patient charts.
Oh.
Are you ready for this?
Yeah, because my wife talks back.
Superlactation.
Is that a woman who is lactating from her breast?
She's just producing a lot of milk.
Who's to say what's a lot? And who cares? Why would she be in an insane asylum? Okay, moving forward.
Religious excitement.
Okay.
Like, you just get the Holy Spirit and you're jumping up. I feel like everyone at my aunt's church would be locked away.
Well, I was going to say, a lot of people look at that as a positive, and they wouldn't hold that against you.
She's Pentecostal. Domestic trouble. Suppressive menstruation. Wouldn't that just be called, like, you're pregnant?
Suppressive menstruation. Or maybe her menstruation suppressing the man.
So because I am irregular, I don't have my period every month, you're going to send me to the hospital?
Yes.
I mean, that's very strange, right? Anxiety. Well, if that's the case, they'd fucking lock me away, right? Urinary problems.
Okay.
Like it hurts when I pee. Have a kidney stone. Have an infection. Send you to the hospital for that?
To a mental institute.
Masturbation.
Oh, God.
We all know that's the work of the devil.
Sure, I would have been locked up so hardcore.
And disappointment in love.
Who made... I don't know. Who came up with these reasons? I was going to say when you started...
Oh, there's more.
That people could use this as a reason to get someone, locked away if they have some kind of, what was it?
I just can't stop flicking my bean.
Oh my God, man! They're about around age of 14 or so.
I'm super lactating.
They would. I was
I'm just like quick, and it like squirts in your eye, so you have me locked away. I mean, what the hell? Okay, morphine addiction.
Okay.
Whiskey drinking. Again, there you go, Dylan. You'd be locked away.
The devil's fluid.
Fear of thunderstorms. And get this, working too hard.
Well, I could get locked away for that.
Yeah, right.
Couldn't we all?
No.
But these reasons don't seem to be at all connected to mental health. I'm just saying.
Right. Yeah. I think there were a lot of people admitted to these hospitals that would never be admitted today.
No, definitely.
One method used to cure patients was called a tranquilizer chair.
Oh, did you get a description of how that works?
A person would be strapped to the chair and immobilized. Their head would be covered with a hood, and they would be doused with icy water to shock them back to sanity.
So they're strapped to a chair and waterboarded.
Yes.
Nice.
With cold water.
Yeah.
Drowning therapy included a patient being placed into a coffin-like box that had holes poked, like in the top. They would be submerged into cold water until no air bubbles were rising. Once the patient stopped breathing, they would be raised back up, rubbed down with alcohol, then revived. This was supposed to encourage patients to straighten up.
Yeah, I'm going to act better. Whatever your I'll stop vigorously lactating because I don't want to be tortured anymore.
Yes, my period will just flow freely now that you have waterboarded me in a coffin.
I will never touch myself again.
Around me, yeah.
Okay.
This is probably one of the most horrific things I can think of. I mean, besides like a lobotomy.
Well, yeah, because you're in this confined space.
Oh, no, this is the next one I'm talking about.
Oh.
I've already moved on.
Okay.
But yeah, being in confined space, not
water
going to work
poured
for me,
in,
and
yeah.
water, yeah, that's horrible. But this one is really fucked up. It's called the Twirling Chair.
Do tell.
A patient would be strapped to a chair, then suspended in the air. The chair would be spun around rapidly in circles up to 100 times per minute.
Man, that's fucking flying. The RPMs there are flying. It's moving out, dude.
And this was to separate humors of the brain.
It was the centrifugal, the G's or centrifugal force, whatever it is that you would experience in that. That is you're going around more than almost 2 times per second. Right? Is my math right? Yeah.
Well, it would result in blood gushing from a patient's ears and nose, and some patients would be rendered unconscious.
Yeah. Yeah, because the human body's not designed to withstand those forces.
Isn't that fucked up?
Who the hell came up with that mess?
Some asshole.
Jesus.
Probably a man. Broughton, along with other hospitals in North Carolina, practiced eugenics, which was sterilization without consent. The sterilization did not require authorization of family members or relatives. Doctors were free to make the decisions for themselves without regard to patients' rights. The total number of victims sterilized in North Carolina was 7,500, with 85% of those being female. Sterilization laws began in 1929 and they ran through 1973. Now, at first, sterilizations were done at a fairly slow rate, but by 1938, it began increasing. So between 1950 and 1952, there were 704 sterilizations in the state.
Well, yeah, the very concept of eugenics is very messed up.
The law stated that these groups targeted for sterilization were, quote, the mentally ill, mentally retarded, and the epileptic.
Yeah, so for anyone not familiar with eugenics, which I think you've likely heard of it in some capacity, is that's basically not wanting people who you considered inferior in some way to reproduce.
Exactly.
So it's forced sterilization, and they would often target. It's often had a racial component to it.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that.
But yeah, it's very scary. And what scares me so much when I think or hear about eugenics is how far and how many people were on board for it.
Well, and I say we're like as a collective in North Carolina, allowing this to go on from 1929 up until 1973. So that's a pretty good chunk of years, right?
Up to 73.
And we're targeting the mentally ill, the mentally disabled, and epileptic people. And this is the same shit. This was like what Hitler was doing.
Well, actually,
I mean,
if I'm not mistaken, there were some in Hitler's camp actually looked to America as in awe, and they were all about our eugenics project. I'm pretty sure the concept of eugenics
they totally were.
came from America.
Eugenics was pretty prominent in the southern states, even after the rest of the country stopped their programs. And one reason why eugenics was so popular, as you mentioned, Dylan, was a racial issue. 35% of those sterilized were black women.
Yes, and they definitely didn't represent 35% of the population.
Between 1964 and 1966, 2 years, right? 64% of the sterilizations in North Carolina targeted African American women.
Yeah, I think it was somewhere around 2014. There was actually a settlement.
There was.
Yeah, to
Yep.
family members of those women.
Yep, you're absolutely right. The Attorney General ruled in 1950 that the superintendent could use shock therapy, insulin treatment, lumbar punctures, and lobotomies without family consent.
Shock treatment has always scared me because just having that applied to your damn side, your temples, or just being immobilized and strapped down to a chair or table terrifies me.
Note to self.
And insulin treatment would be basically poisoning you with insulin.
Oh, we're going to get to that.
Oh my.
Also, men and women could be castrated.
All right.
Insulin therapy is when a patient would be injected with a large amount of insulin, causing them to have seizures and then fall into a coma. Mostly the patients would wake up docile and drooling.
Yeah, because their body's in shock.
And if you listen to our Offbeat episode on Zelda Fitzgerald, we touched on the insulin therapy as that was being performed at the Highland Hospital in Asheville. It's part of that story. Shock therapy damaged brain tissues beyond repair, but it added a calmness to patients. It was used to cure mostly mania and excitability.
Yeah, I guess you are calm. Your brain's been fried.
Broughton performed lobotomies for several years. Between 1939 and 1951, 18,000 lobotomies were reportedly performed in the United States.
A lobotomy, man, and it's so primitive how they would perform the lobotomy. They basically cram a big pointed spike up your nose, right? Or no, they put that little grabber and they just grab little...
Well, then it became like in the eyeball, like in the corner of the eye. They were trying to do it through the skull.
And they're just grabbing...
There were different methods that didn't quite work.
Little pieces of your brain or just...
But I guess it was like the transorbital lobotomy became the one where it was like through the eye, which totally freaks me out.
And be like, oh, look how calm they are now that I've poked this spike into their frontal lobe.
I really want a lobotomy kit.
I know you do.
For a gift. My birthday's coming up.
Or you're not going to try to use it, are you?
No, I just want it.
Okay.
I think.
I'm just making sure.
I haven't decided.
Man, just imagine the article of someone broke into your house and burglar killed with lobotomy spike.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be dope?
Talk about standing your ground.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's discuss Broughton's ghosts.
Well, I just knew that there were likely some ghost legends tied to this hospital.
It is said that the hospital was so crowded in the early years with patients who were often considered dangerous that doctors would arm themselves with a long stocking stuffed with soap. They would enter the wards and the doctor would swing this over their head, like in a helicopter motion, in order to safely traverse the hallways. So, like, if a patient came close or tried to attack, they would be hit in the head with this flying brick of soap.
Oh my God. So here they come, and they're walking down the hall like Petey Pablo, putting it in the air.
North Carolina,
Yeah.
Come on and raise up. Put your soap in a sock, twist it around your head like a helicopter.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, like that.
Just like that. Mm-hmm. And so they're just trying to get from one end to the other. But, I mean, it's just a comical. I know it wasn't.
It's fucking horrible, but yeah, I can't help but laugh a little bit because it's just so fucking absurd.
Jesus.
One treatment is that patients were actually held down by a nurse while another staff member would beat them with the soap. So think about like Full Metal Jacket when they hold the guy down and beat him with soap.
Yeah, because he keeps getting them in trouble. But yeah, that's always left a mark on me too. Someone grabbing their sheets, or 3 or 4 people, and holding me down and
Soap
hitting me with the socks in the soap, or soap in the socks.
Well, I think they're doing this to poor patients who are mentally ill.
It's just it sounds like a house of horrors.
It does sound like a house of horrors. Now, due to all this, Broughton is said to be incredibly haunted. Many nurses and staff have reported seeing apparitions, rattling sounds, screams in empty buildings, and other unexplainable phenomena. Other strange noises have been heard, such as ghostly typewriters clicking in empty offices.
That would be creepy.
Ghostly nurses dressed in like early 1900s uniforms.
Ooh.
I mean, it sounds like a really creepy place to be, and especially during the graveyard shift.
Yeah, I bet.
Like, one example with the screams and the empty buildings is that there was literally a building that was totally empty, and the staff members heard like blood-curdling screams coming out of this building like someone was being murdered, and they called the police. Local police show up, go in the building, flashlights, walk around. There's no one in there. The building's locked. Like, there's no reason why you should hear these blood-curdling screams.
Wow, that's I mean, they definitely seems like they heard something, or they wouldn't have went so far as to call the police.
Exactly right. In 1950s, in the 1950s, this is such a strange story. Just talk about weird. Twins Betty Jo and Bobby Jean Eller were admitted into Broughton. Betty Jo was said to have like schizophrenia, and she was often dominated by her sister Bobby Jean. When Bobby Jean would go on a hunger strike and starve herself, she would make Betty Jo stop eating as well. Now, eventually, the doctors were growing concerned over this type of behavior and decided to separate the twins. One was moved to Ward 8, and the other was moved to Ward 12. And they were both moved into like single rooms. Didn't have a roommate. On April 12th of 1962, the day after the pair had finally been split up, a nurse did a room check and found Betty Jo dead in her bed. When staff checked on Bobby Jean, she was also dead.
Really?
An autopsy showed the two had died within an hour of each other. They were 31 years old.
And it wasn't like suicide or self-harm?
Nope.
Really?
Just natural causes.
Wow. That's
Isn't that
weird.
Strange, huh?
Yeah, maybe they just couldn't stand maybe their hearts were broken. They couldn't stand being away from each other.
Broughton has a series of tunnels. Some are 15 feet wide, underground, connecting various buildings together. According to legends, the hallways were often used to chain up patients when sedatives weren't available.
All right.
Others say the tunnels were merely in place to keep patients' privacy and to protect them from inclement weather. So, like, instead of walking them out in the snow, they would just shuttle them through the tunnels.
Wow, that's a rather big expense when you're constructing the buildings or constructing the grounds there. It seems like it costs a lot of money to make the tunnels.
They were also supposedly used for patients' privacy because, as I mentioned before, a lot of local residents would just come to the campus to have picnics or drive around. And so it was said that they would send patients through these tunnels so that their identity wasn't known to everyone in the community.
Oh, that's pretty interesting.
However, the tunnels are considered a hotbed for paranormal activity.
How could they not be?
Super creepy.
Well, I mean, I bet it's just creepy. Well, anyone goes down there is going to be weirded out anyway, because I'm assuming it's kind of dark and damp and all that stuff you would imagine in a tunnel.
Tunnels creep me out anyway.
Well, anything underground creeps me out.
Yeah, I don't like to be. I'm very claustrophobic, and it's just scary.
So you think you could go spelunking?
No way.
Cave diving?
No, I know I could never.
No.
It's like that horror movie. What's it called? The Descent?
Yeah.
People have told me or recommended, like, oh, you should watch that, because I'm a huge horror fan. But I'm like, no fucking way. Because I am too claustrophobic.
It's pretty intense.
Okay, our ward is called one of the most haunted areas of the hospital. In 1970, Dr. Paul Boyles was a psychiatrist working with the Extended Care Division. He fell in love with one of the nurses, a woman named Betty Yarborough. The woman was also married with 2 teenage daughters. And Boyles, he was married as well, and he lived on the grounds with his wife and 3 children. But the pair began an affair that would last for some time. Finally, Betty ended the affair. A distraught Boyles couldn't accept this. On April 22nd of 1971, around 7:30 a.m., the pair entered into an office together. Someone said it was like a medical, like a pill, like a nurse's.
Oh, like a dispensary?
Like a pill room.
Okay.
Someone else said it was just like an office area. So they're like in this, this little room together, and another staff member heard some sort of commotion in there. While they're in this locked room, Dr. Boyles had pulled out a knife and cut Betty's throat. She had 2 stab wounds in her neck area. Dr. Boyle then turned a gun on himself. Both died.
What the hell, Boyle?
Many staff members say the office is often the subject of paranormal activity, including the door rattling and loud noises from the inside.
Oh, I just don't think I could work around okay, let's just say this. If I was working there and I experienced that, I would not be working there anymore.
And this is a legit story. I confirmed it. There are newspaper articles that were written about this murder-suicide, and as well as the twins. So this is not just like some old ghost story that's been passed down.
Now, have me and you, I got to ask, have we ever talked about this very story?
No.
Never discussed it in any other capacity?
No.
Wow. That's okay. I'm weirded out right now.
Why?
Because from the moment we talked about the descent, all the way through when you stopped talking just now, I was having deja vu the entire time.
Strange.
You know, maybe it's a parallel reality bleeding over. I don't know.
You're glitching in the Matrix.
Maybe.
Ward 24 was also considered a very scary area, or at least it is today. It was a high control area, which meant it housed like volatile patients. Nurses and staff members have reported feeling electric static shocks to their entire bodies walking through the ward.
Ooh, I wonder what that feels like.
They feel touches on their skin and the feeling of breath on their necks and their faces while they're on Ward 24.
All that sounds really scary. Could you imagine feeling like someone's breathing on your neck or right in your face?
Or feeling little like electric static pulses and shocks to your body while you're there.
Or feeling like someone's touching you on the shoulder and such.
Heebie-jeebies.
You sounded like you had the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah. In December of 1996, a 57-year-old Alzheimer's patient was brutally murdered at the hospital. Bobby Dean Creason had been a patient at Haven Nursing Home in Asheville, North Carolina. After altering his medications, doctors recommended that he stay at Broughton for 2 weeks just for observation and until his medication was stabilized. Creason was known to wander the halls, which that's very common with Alzheimer's patients. Especially they'll get sundowners or in the evenings when it gets dark. They will roam and wander.
Yeah.
Which is like why it can be so dangerous a lot of times for Alzheimer's patients to live alone or without supervision. A 23-year-old patient named Joseph Allen Vore, who is from McDowell County, North Carolina, had also been admitted to Broughton in August of 1996. And this was just a couple months before, after being found not competent to stand trial for murder. The 23-year-old had viciously attacked an elderly man, 79-year-old Paul Robert Birch, killing him at the Pinnacle Rest Home in Dysertsville. Birch had been institutionalized since the age of 4, and he was described as meek as a lamb.
Oh.
So this young kid, 23, I mean, to me, that's still a kid, attacks the 79-year-old. Everybody said he was just quiet, meek, like a little child. The hospital did not inform Creason's family that he would be sharing a ward with a man who was deemed criminally insane and violent, meaning Vore.
Well, yeah, you wouldn't expect. You know, you have a family member who has Alzheimer's, which I'm going to assume he's older.
Well, he's like in his late 50s. I think it's 57, 59 was what I just said.
Of course, this is early on.
57.
They don't...
well, this is 96.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't like that long ago.
Okay, so I was in my head. I was stuck back in the 50s for some reason.
Okay. Well, on Christmas Eve of 1996, Creason was missing. Staff found him dead under Vor's bed. Vor had beat the man to death, as well as strangled him.
Wow.
Vor had a serious history of mental illness, having been admitted to state hospitals 12 times since 1989. A judge ruled that Vor would not be prosecuted for the murder. So at the time of the murder, there was no specialized unit to treat violent people with mental illness at Broughton. Patients, including those who were a danger to others, were allowed to roam the wards freely with little supervision. So at the time of Creson's death, 10% of Broughton's patients were admitted by a court order.
Wow, that just seems like you're asking for trouble.
Well, Creson's family was very upset. They were like, if we had known that our loved one would be on a ward with someone who was violent, who was dangerous, who had just committed a murder,
yeah,
we would not have let him go there.
Well, no, and then
because it was just for 2 weeks.
These people, so they just had him there for his medication to stabilize, and they were ready. They were going to send him back home.
Right.
Wow, that's very sad.
This 23-year-old Vor wasn't charged in either of these murders.
I mean, I just don't know how you have someone who has these kinds of issues and a record of being violent, and you're letting them just walk around and supervise.
I don't understand why there weren't more protocols in place.
Not only
to supervise this person,
right?
Yeah,
or at the very least, he shouldn't be around other people who aren't on his level, if you will. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's just asking for trouble.
It totally is.
Seems poorly managed.
Serial killer Leslie Warren, whom we featured early on the podcast, was a patient at Broughton Hospital at one time.
Really?
Yeah. Most recently, 22-year-old Jody Pychon was found hanging in her room. Ruled a suicide, Heather Pychon, which is Jody's mother, she doesn't buy this. She wanted a private autopsy, but learned it would cost her $5,000 out of pocket, which she just didn't have at the time. Jody had bruising on her face and ears, her mother noted, which she thought was kind of strange.
Well, yeah.
Jody allegedly hung herself with a bedsheet, but her mother just absolutely does not think that her daughter committed suicide.
Well, I mean, the bruising, I mean, you would expect if someone hung themselves to commit suicide, that just their neck would be affected with marks and things.
I believe this was in 2017 or 18, so it's not been that long ago.
Really?
Yeah. In 2008, a doctor named Shujat Nathani, he was the chief psychiatrist of admissions unit. He filed a complaint and then resigned. He called the hospital a dangerous place for workers. He cited grim conditions where the staff was regularly attacked by violent patients. One ward in particular was packed full of violent, dangerous young men known to assault the nurses' aides. So between 2005 and 2008, while Dr. Nathani was employed there, CNAs at Broughton suffered 91% of all injuries reported.
My God. Poor damn CNA's been hung out there to dry.
Yeah, no shit. So that has been our story about Broughton Hospital.
Wow, and that last stuff you talked about was not that long ago. That's happening now. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I think at one point in the past, 10, 15 years, the hospital lost its Medicare funding.
Wow.
And that's what happens when there's really severe conditions at a hospital.
Right, because you have to meet certain standards
and criteria.
Right, yeah.
So it's been plagued with problems in the last, 15, 20 years.
Oh my gosh. Do you reckon it's cursed?
Well, I don't know about that, but it does sound like there's some creepy stuff that goes on there.
Well, yeah, and some of this stuff could be avoided.
I read a book to provide some of the paranormal stories, which they were so, some of them were so detailed and there were so many that I didn't, go into great detail because it would just be this ghost on this floor, and then I had this experience. But the book I read, if you're interested, is called Haunted Broughton. It's by a nurse, Margaret Langley. She was a graveyard shift nurse there for many years.
Oh, that's interesting.
She was able to speak with some of the older staff, who had been there previously, who told her their experiences. I mean, it just sounds like it's not really one concentrated area of the hospital that's super haunted. I touched on a few of the places that are considered the most haunted spots.
Yeah.
But these people are having experiences all over the hospital.
Jeez.
Just seeing patients or what looks like a patient, cut across the hallway and then just fade into the wall. Or seeing someone like walk into a room and the nurse follows them there thinking like, why is this patient up out of their bed? Get to the room and it's empty.
Okay.
There was like a story about a screaming drink machine.
Really?
Yeah, like a soda machine. And every time that a staff member would put change in to get a Coke, the machine would like scream. Like it sounded like a person screaming.
That's weird.
Which could just be like a mechanical thing, but these people were all like weirded out by it and didn't want to use that drink machine because it sounded like a person screaming.
Well, yeah, I mean, it very well could be a mechanical thing, but I couldn't hard to imagine what mechanical thing sounds like someone screaming.
There was kind of a main room. They call it like the Christmas room. And back in the day, they would have a lot of holiday parties in this room. It's where they always have the Christmas tree. I think there might be like a piano in that room as well. They would carol, that kind of stuff. And that room supposedly gives people really bad vibes. They often hear the piano playing, sounds of a piano, and there's no one in there.
That's wild.
It is wild.
Yeah, I don't think I could work around a place like that.
I'm not cut out for that.
No.
It's just too sad for me.
It is just the energy alone. I think it would be oppressive. Right?
Well, you're like a tuning fork with your little empathic self.
Well, it's kind of sounds like I've had the way I feel when I'm at work.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, yeah. I mean, I assume there's got to be some sad energy there, maybe some oppressive feeling energy. I would like to know if there is any truth to the stories about like the tunnels and if they were like really chaining people up down there.
Yeah, I know.
Because that's fucked up.
Well, that is fucked up. And it's also, you're just, that's ups the likelihood of something bad happening when you treat people like that.
And were they really beating patients with soap? And the doctors were really walking down the hallways with like their soap sock, like hitting patients because it was so overcrowded. I mean, that's just wild.
I mean, well, for one, you shouldn't ask anyone to work in that environment. So, I mean, that's a failure from the very top as far as the overcrowding and things go. And that happens in our jails. It happens in, certain other institutions. And it happens in our schools. I mean, there's, different consequences for this. But, I mean, we can do better, right?
Well, we would think.
As a nation.
Well, these states and federal governments have these budgets to work with. And there's all sorts of spending in there for unnecessary things. But that seems like the money never goes to help the mentally ill. It never goes to like substance abuse. It never goes to our school systems.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
I mean, well, it seems it's like any other conspiracy, if you will. It seems to be what logical sense would that? Why would it be like that? And it seems like it's by design.
Well,
like you don't care about these things.
Well, they don't. They don't give a fuck about us.
Shit.
But I learned a lot about Broughton. I mean, it was a hospital I've always heard the term like Broughton. When people say Broughton, especially in this area, we know what that means.
Yep.
But I learned a lot about the hospital. I didn't realize the history behind it. Some of those stories were very strange, like the murder-suicide's pretty creepy. The twins.
Yeah, I know.
That's unusual, right?
What's the odds? But, you always hear about that twin connection, so maybe there's something to that.
Maybe you're right.
Oh, well, thank you for that offbeat, and I look forward to other stories about creepy asylums.
Yeah, next Wednesday, we'll have a brand new asylum to explore.
Oh, wow. It's the middle of the week. You know what day it is, right?
Wednesday.
It's a day for you to get humped.
Okay, Dylan.
Now,
okay.
I'm talking about you, Heather.
Oh, I'm leaving now. Okay, guys. Thanks a lot. Have a great week, and we'll be back on Sunday with more true crime.